You're watching World Insight, our special program Way In 2 sessions from the Great Hall of the People. The Hong Kong government is doing its best to contain COVID-19 after months of social unrest. How's the economic and political situation in Hong Kong shaping up? My interview with Raymond Tam, an NPC deputy and also a seasoned politician earlier serving Hong Kong SAR. A heavy task in the most unusual year, a crucial meeting with a big message. The economy, the pandemic, China-US relations, and the indelible changes of the world all take courage and resolve. Finally, a gathering for China's annual political season. Interviews with newsmakers and analysis about an unparalleled time. Join me on Way In 2 sessions. Before the onset of the coronavirus pandemic, Hong Kong was in a tight spot with rising protests and violence on the streets. That stoked concerns over law and order. How can Hong Kong SAR's economy bear the brunt of social unrest? And Hong Kong SAR NPC deputy Raymond Tam minced no words, spelling out the need for legislation under Article 23 of Hong Kong Basic Law. Here's his take. About the establishing and improving of the legal framework as well as the implementation mechanism for Hong Kong SAR for the national security issue. As a People's Deputy, what do you make of that possibility?
I think it is a very positive initiative, not only for Hong Kong, but also for the entire nation as well. As you know, the Basic Law was endorsed and promulgated by the National People's Congress, dated back in April 1990. And at that time, we have the Basic Law, Article 23, stipulating that it is the constitutional responsibility for the Hong Kong SAR to implement a local legislation to give effect to preserving national security in 7 areas. Since the reunification in 1997, some 23 years have gone by, but still, as of today, the SAR government and SAR legislature have not been successful in enacting a national security law in Hong Kong in accordance with Article 23. And that is a political reality. But at the same time, looking at what happened in the past year in Hong Kong, since sometime in May or June last year, Hong Kong has come through a very unstable situation in the community because of some radicals and the opposition have organized on-street demonstration and protests, and many of them actually have gone to violence and illegal acts, and that actually creates a huge concern in Hong Kong. And not only because it has broken the peace in Hong Kong, but also some of the protest requests is to go for independence of Hong Kong. And that is totally against one country, two system. And to many Hong Kong people, only one country, two system would serve the overall interests of Hong Kong, the entire Hong Kong community. And that creates the concern in many parts of the community that the lacking of an effective national security legislation in Hong Kong would be a loophole in the legal system and also law enforcement system to preserve the national security of the whole country. But the political reality continues to be, in the foreseeable future, it is very difficult for the SAR government and for the SAR legislature to be successful in to give full legislative effect to Article 23 of the Basic Law. And therefore, the proposed decision, as announced at the opening session of the National People's Congress plenary session, actually has a draft resolution to be considered by all deputies of NPC to delegate or to authorize the Standing Committee of NPC to legislate a national law which would be applicable to Hong Kong through Article 18 of the Basic Law, and to focus on 4 areas that would jeopardize national security not only in Hong Kong, but also the entire country.
Mr. Tam, however, some been suggesting whether it is jumping over, in fact, the responsibility of the Legislative Council inside Hong Kong. What do you make of comments like that?
I think the comment is not based on the actual facts. If we read the proposal carefully, it is clearly stated, first of all, it would not cover the entire range of areas or sectors that relating to national security in the current Article 23-1. And it is also clearly stipulated that the current legislative initiative would not repeal and it would not substitute the Article 23 of the Basic Law. It has stated very clearly. And at the same time, the central authorities also state quite clearly that it remains to be the constitutional responsibility of SAR to enact a proper national security legislation in full accordance with Article 23 as soon as possible without any further procrastination in Hong Kong. So I think this new initiative would, first of all, to address the present and immediate need, and it is constitutional, and at the same time, it would not remove the duty and power of the SAR government to continue the work on national security legislation in full accordance with Basic Law Article 23. So I would say that would be in parallel, but the current initiative would provide a more imminent solution. What has happened in the past year, and would go, as I have just said, it would have gone a long way in alleviating some of the concerns of the various sectors of the Hong Kong community.
There's another issue. Some suspect the security mechanism or apparatus from the mainland is likely to be more operational in Hong Kong as a result of this. What do you make of that?
I think if we read Clause 4 of the draft resolution, it has two parts. The first part actually would give a responsibility to the SAR government to set up a national security department or national security bureau to deal with all law enforcement matters relating to national security matters arising from the new national law to be promulgated by the Standing Committee of NPC. And at the same time, the relevant law enforcement agencies in Hong Kong will have to step up their enforcement power in this respect. So that's the first part. And the second part actually provide that the relevant National Security Ministry of the State Council could set up an agency in Hong Kong so as to ensure that the effective implementation of the national law in Hong Kong, probably through the new law enforcement agency to be set up by the Hong Kong government. And of course, details are not contained in the proposed resolution at the moment. But I'm sure that when the Standing Committee of NPC would have to consider the details of the national law, they would also address this division of labor, if you like, and how the two parties, the one set up by Hong Kong government and the other sent by State Council National Security Ministries, how they would work together in details in the new law. And I'm sure the SAR government would also work on that as well. So details would be further discussed and would be further announced by the Standing Committee. But the essence is that it would put the legislative responsibility and the law enforcement responsibility also on the SAR government, because under one country, two systems, law enforcement in Hong Kong would have to be shouldered by the Hong Kong SAR government and the relevant department as well. So I'm sure that this principle would continue to be the case. But of course, the national security will rise above not only applicable to Hong Kong, because Hong Kong is part of the whole nation, and national security is concerning about the whole nation. So the National Security Ministry of State Council would certainly have a role to play. But to what extent that particular role and function would they be playing would be subject to further discussion by the Standing Committee.
I see. Another important point is some suspect this would mean the end of the one country, two systems of Hong Kong. Do you think that this is really the reality? Well,
if we look at the details, it actually follows exactly the one country, two system routes. The reason being that the relevant clause in the nation's constitution is Article 31 and Article 62 of our constitution. And also, the current proposal is for the Standing Committee to follow Article 18 of the Basic Law to endorse a national law, and then through attaching to Annex 3 to the Basic Law, and to be promulgated in Hong Kong SAR. And throughout, the SAR government would have a constitutional role to play in accordance with the relevant article in the Basic Law. So Basic Law itself is the legal instrument to give full effect to one country, two system principle. And because the current initiative is to act in full accordance with the provision already provided for in the Basic Law, and also in particular Article 18 and Annex 3, that is another example of why one country, two system would work.
And final question before we go, Mr. Tam. Of course, there's going to be a Legislative Council election in about a few months' time, and this is certainly a very sensitive, politically sensitive time inside Hong Kong, particularly given the earlier experiences of political division. So what would that mean when we have a mixture of uncertainties, and now you have possibly a new decision regarding the national security issue related to Hong Kong, and also in the future you have, in a few months' time, a very important election season in Hong Kong?
Well, I have been working for the Hong Kong government for 30 years, and my last 10 years in the Hong Kong SAR government, I was responsible also the general elections in Hong Kong, including the Legislative Council election. I can tell you that there is never a good time and never a bad time to hold such an election in Hong Kong. We would organize and conduct that public election in accordance with the Basic Law and in accordance with the provisions in our local electoral legislation. That is the duty of the Hong Kong government, to conduct such elections in a open, fair and equitable manner. And that is the principle that I'm sure my successor would strictly adhere to. And of course, in Hong Kong, we are an international city. We are also part of our country as well. As one of the former CE put it, we are the super connected to the rest of the world. And therefore, there are all sorts of people in Hong Kong, all sorts of political forces operating in Hong Kong. Hong Kong people has witnessed all kinds of political uncertainty, but we managed to weather the storm because we have full confidence on one country, two system. We have full confidence on central government. We have full confidence in the rule of law in Hong Kong. We still have full confidence that no matter what continue to happen or not happen in Hong Kong in terms of political landscape, in terms of uncertainties, but Hong Kong people, under the care of the central government, under the support and the constitutional support of the Basic Law, the one country, two system principle, we will continue to rise above all challenges and difficulties.